Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. The US-mediated talks in Geneva between Ukraine and Russia have concluded after 2 short days of negotiations. Despite the parties involved speaking of progress, the consensus is peace is still a long way away. More on the details of the meeting in Switzerland in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. EU shield regions bordering Russia from economic downturn. Poland considers making a case for World War II compensation from Russia. And Warsaw vows the Polish economy will catch up with Britain within a few years. The Geneva peace talks brought no tangible results despite being described by participants as difficult but businesslike, with progress on military issues. But the much-anticipated issue of territory seems unresolved, at least for now. Paweł Trzaskowski brings us to speed on the key takeaways.
The Russian delegation is leaving the venue where the US-led peace talks with Ukraine were held. The second day of talks lasted only 2 hours. Comments from both sides are restrained. The long-awaited word progress can be heard.
There is progress, but no details can be disclosed at this stage.
But difficult was another word used to describe the meeting.
Talks were difficult, but businesslike.
After receiving the briefing, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also admitted that the talks were not easy. And as both sides remain tight-lipped about the details, the only thing revealed so far is that more meetings of this kind will be held. Possibly many more, in fact, as the main bone of contention remains unresolved.
In my view, Vladimir Putin is still intent on subjugating and controlling all of Ukraine. And anything less than that, really, in the eyes of his Kremlin colleagues and the Russian people, would be a strategic defeat.
And over 4 years of sustained resistance, Ukraine has been striving to prevent exactly that from happening. There is a factor that could break this stalemate, and it's called Washington. But for over a year, the Trump administration has chosen to apply pressure to Kiev, not Moscow. Hence the US president's insistence on urgent talks.
Look, so far, Ukraine better come to the table fast.
And with Trump as president, Russia has only been given the red carpet treatment, with no tariffs and only minor sanctions imposed on the Kremlin.
Thank you so much.
In the eyes of many, this sort of appeasement is nothing but contrary to the strongman posture that the Trump administration wants to project.
A lot of people assumed this administration was going to come into office and have a very confrontational, great power competition style of diplomacy. But in fact, it has been anything but that.
And that's why Kiev keeps feeling the heat of Trump's urgency to end the war quickly, even at the price of unjust peace, a scenario that keeps worrying Europe.
We would be fooling ourselves if we as Europe would think that there will be peace that would be maintained if Russia wins.
And despite being engaged in a full-scale aggression against Ukraine, Russia's military capabilities could still pose a threat to the region.
Point is that they're able to do something even today, but they will eventually build up.
And this build-up process is expected to take up to 5 years once the war in Ukraine ends. But for now, militarily, Russia is still making little progress on the battlefield and keeps terrorizing civilians to break Ukraine's resolve. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
The European Union is ready to invest more in areas bordering Russia, Ukraine and Belarus. The goal is to ease the economic burden that comes with being close to high-risk areas. The strategy, however, doesn't involve new money from the current EU budget, expiring 2028, which is already stretched. More on the new scheme and who is expected to invest in Piotr Miszczuk's report.
This is Narva, Estonia's third-largest city. It's on the border with Russia and is part of a region that saw a 16% economic decline after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now the EU has a plan to help regions like this one.
For these regions, more than anywhere else in Europe, there is a clear before and after 24th February 2022.
The new plan will encompass regions in 9 countries across Europe, and its main aim is to unlock significant loans for the slowdown-stricken regions.
Its main element is a joint investment platform involving the European Investment Bank to implement 28 billion euros in projects across these regions.
Along with these multi-purpose funds, the EU has several proposals geared towards stimulating growth in the border regions, but experts caution the plan is likely to produce the intended effect in the long run.
Although this assistance, which is now being planned by the European Union, is not a direct transfer of funds, but some loan guarantees for private businesses which are located in this region. So the support and the effect of this assistance would be pretty long-lasting and not immediate.
However, experts raise concerns about equating bordering Ukraine with bordering Russia or Belarus. This is particularly visible in Poland's case, with the country's northeast being blighted by Belarus's hybrid warfare and weaponized migration.
The border with Belarus and Russia would be closed for a kind of a foreseeable period of time because of illegal migration, while the border with Ukraine would be hopefully a border with a friendly country, a country which will be developing pretty fast.
The regions that share a border with Russia and Belarus might get another injection of funds in the EU budget for 2028-2034.
The European Commission has submitted its budget proposal for a period following 2027. Indeed, this proposal includes extra funds for regions bordering Russia and Belarus.
Negotiations concerning the next budget are ongoing and are expected to be concluded by the end of the year. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
Poland may soon call on Russia to pay its dues. As confirmed by the Polish government, a team of Polish experts and historians is assessing legal grounds to file for World War II compensation from Moscow. Even though Poland has not yet forwarded an official request, Russian officials were quick to comment. Kazimierz Łysiak brings us to speed on what could be a major compensation case to come.
Poland could soon demand compensation from Russia for all damages suffered during the Second World War from the Soviet Union. The spokesperson for the Polish government has confirmed that a team of experts is currently assessing the legal grounds.
We want to make a very thorough and detailed academic query and balance of all the damages. We are talking about losses suffered as the result of the Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939 and over the course of the occupation. Only then we can consider a political decision.
While Poland hasn't made any demands yet, Russia already caught wind of these preparations and responded with sarcasm, referencing an opera where a Pole is fooled by a Russian.
As reparations, we can provide a link to the video of the opera Ivan Suzanin.
But if Poland does file a lawsuit, it most likely wouldn't be for reparations, but rather compensation. It's an important legal distinction, as reparations can only be asked from a losing party in a war.
When it comes to demanding any kind of reparations from Russia, the case is particularly challenging because the Soviet Union was part of the Allied coalition.
There are also plenty of other challenges, like historical documentation on Soviet crimes being held mostly by Russia. Since Moscow launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, relations with Warsaw have also reached a historic low. That basically means that no one in Poland expects actual payments from Russia.
It's not feasible at all legally, because the Russian state will simply reject any claims of reparations. So for me, it's more important to remind the world about the Soviet aggression, about the Soviet occupation of Poland, about the Soviet domination of Poland after the war.
Before the USSR joined the Allies, it invaded Poland along with Hitler's Nazi Germany in 1939. Even after flipping sides, it continued its occupation, with the regime often described as equally or even more brutal than the Nazi rule. After the war, Poland, abandoned by its Western allies, ended up in the Soviet zone of influence and lost most of its crucial lands to its occupiers.
The Soviet Union took more than half of the pre-war Polish territory in the east. What's interesting, there is basically no legal act authorizing this theft.
It's estimated that the Soviet Union murdered at least 150,000 Poles during the war and forcefully deported millions. This is common knowledge in Poland, but that's often not the case abroad.
So this is more about education, this is more about foreign policy than any possibility of really getting some payments from Russia. But it still makes sense, in my opinion, to collect all historical data and, first of all, to remind the world about the Soviet aggression, about the Soviet imperialism.
Today, this imperialism is once again on display in Ukraine. For TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
A state of emergency and the release of 250,000 tons of strategic crude. These are the measures introduced by Slovakia as the country faces an oil shortage crisis along with Hungary. In the aftermath of the Druzhba pipeline shutdown, the two reached out to Croatia, a country willing to help but reluctant to transport Russian oil. Andrew Sweeney has more.
With Russian oil supplies halted, Slovakia's economy is feeling withdrawal pains. The Slovakian government has declared an oil emergency in the country, releasing 250,000 tons of crude oil from a strategic reserve.
The fact that there are strategic reserves means something, and that the Slovak population is not immediately deprived of the access to oil. The refineries can still process it. But it is, of course, a dire situation.
Hungary's government, the only other EU member state affected by the stop in supplies, says more Russian oil is coming by sea.
Hungary's crude oil supply is secure, as our country has strategic reserves sufficient for 96 days. And if Croatia complies with European rules, Russian crude oil arriving by sea will also be available from mid-March.
However, Zagreb has already vocally opposed the notion, making it clear Russian oil wasn't acceptable.
Besides Russia, there are other sources of oil. The entire European Union today functions on non-Russian oil. It is clear to me that those who still use it are focused on profit, but that profit finances the Russian war machine that destroys Ukrainian lives and economy every day.
Access to the ports of those shadow fleet tankers is going to be greatly limited. I think it's betting on the wrong horse.
Oil deliveries to Slovakia and Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline have been halted since January 27th. Ukraine's foreign ministry said a Russian attack was responsible. However, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban claims Kiev deliberately damaged the pipeline to influence the country's general election on April 12th.
This campaign based on a very hostile feeling towards Ukraine. As you know, a few days before, he declared that Ukraine is an enemy. It's not only a conflicting partner, but it's an enemy to Hungary.
In retaliation for what it described as political interference, for which it has provided no evidence, Hungary's government announced it would halt diesel fuel exports to Ukraine.
Today, we decided to suspend diesel fuel deliveries to Ukraine. Shipments will not resume until oil transit toward Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline is restored. Volodymyr Zelensky has decided not to restart oil transit for political reasons, deliberately putting Hungary's energy supply at risk, while we play an essential role in Ukraine's energy security. A large part of Ukraine's gas, electricity and diesel imports arrives through or from Hungary.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico has also announced that this country would join Viktor Orban in halting diesel fuel supplies to Ukraine. The Hungarian Prime Minister's anti-EU Fidesz party currently lags 11% behind Peter Magyar's Tisza party, which wants to restore relations with Brussels. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
It's the first testimony of its kind. Tech mogul Mark Zuckerberg is appearing before a California court on Wednesday in an unprecedented trial focusing on the potentially harmful effects of social media on children. But his company, Meta, isn't the only party accused of making their products purposefully addictive. Aisha Abaj reports.
Are social media platforms engineered to addict children? A landmark lawsuit in California claims tech giants built complex algorithms designed to exploit human psychology.
But the detective was the one that told us about the blackout challenge on the social media apps, the dangerous algorithms, and he saw a dangerous rise in children passing because of these dangerous algorithms.
On Wednesday, Mark Zuckerberg is set to testify in an unprecedented social media trial that questions whether Meta's platforms deliberately addict and harm children.
I think is really important is what we can learn about the practices of Meta companies that include Facebook, Instagram, and what was known about the harm to young people and what was pushed aside in the interest of making profit.
But it's not just Meta on trial. The case also targets Google's YouTube as well as Snapchat and TikTok.
We knew we had Snapchat. What we didn't know is that Snapchat had allowed anonymous apps and integrated them into their product. Anonymous apps have a long history of causing bullying because there's no accountability for what is said.
The latter two have already settled with the plaintiff. And who is the plaintiff? A 20-year-old woman identified by the initials KGM, who claims her early use of social media addicted her to the technology and exacerbated depression and suicidal thoughts.
I think it is important that we see this kind of accountability in the United States because, of course, the name of the game there is deregulation. But we can see here that people are looking for accountability. There are increasingly popular movements that are very critical of big tech and AI companies.
This may be one of the biggest showdowns yet between the public and big tech, and it is unlikely to be the last. The image of social media platforms is rapidly changing, and accountability is no longer an option. From a tool to connect with loved ones to something critics compare to a chemical addiction in the brain. In other words, a drug.
I don't know how they live with themselves. They have children. They don't allow their children to be on social media. I don't know how Mark Zuckerberg can live with himself knowing that his hands are bloody.
The focus is now firmly on protecting children. Australia became the first country to ban social media for teens under 16 in December. France will ban social media for children under 15 starting in September, and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez joined the club earlier this month.
Spain will ban access to social media for minors under the age of 16.
And in Poland,
we follow Australia's example. That means we expect big tech companies not to allow children access to harmful content that is available on their platforms, essentially any content, unless they choose to verify it.
The debate is already on.
Mr. Zuckerberg, did Meta purposely design the platform to harm children?
This landmark trial may redefine the balance between profit and responsibility in the digital age. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badge.
Poland is becoming a European economic force to be reckoned with. Low inflation paired with low unemployment were singled out by Prime Minister Donald Tusk at the Poland A Year of Acceleration conference as reasons behind the country's solid growth. And yet, while macroeconomic indicators paint a very rosy picture, significant challenges still loom. Jakub Kapiszewski has more.
Welcome to Poland, the fastest growing big economy in the EU. That's a fact that the government emphasizes on every possible occasion, like Wednesday's press conference.
Yes, last year we caught up with Japan and we are catching up with countries like New Zealand, Israel and Spain. And there's reason to be even more ambitious and reach even higher.
Let's look at the data, the source of the Prime Minister's optimism. Economic growth is solid, inflation is low, and so is unemployment. The Prime Minister takes considerable pride in investor confidence in the country. A prime example of that confidence is the record performance of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, but not only that.
The yield on Polish bonds is falling, which means there's no shortage of those willing to lend us money. We won't overuse this opportunity, but can you imagine a better statement about Poland's stability than how many investors want to buy our bonds?
The country's finance minister followed with even greater optimism.
I accept the challenge to catch up with the UK in 5 to 6 years when it comes to GDP per capita and accounting for purchasing power. This is the area where Poland caught up with Japan last year, something Lech Wałęsa, our former president, dreamed about 40 years ago, is now a fact.
But despite all that optimism, significant challenges remain. Poland stands on a demographic cliff. The country's economy is not as high-tech as Poles would like it to be, and the venture capital ecosystem is still in its infancy. As a result, Poland's rate of growth will begin to slow down starting in 2027.
One of the reasons is, of course, demography. We're losing people, so the country is becoming smaller. We have fewer people of the working age, which is going to diminish the productivity and also consumption, the internal market.
Lately, it was the consumers who pushed the GDP figures higher, so that's an obvious problem. Another one is the private sector's permanent unwillingness to invest.
We have a very low investment rate, so our investment rate to GDP is about 17% in Germany, or the average in the European Union is about 22%. So if we would be investing as much as the other economies across Europe, probably we would be growing a lot faster.
The government wants to tackle the low private investment rate, but some things just aren't doable in one term or by a single policy. Which leads to the conclusion, becoming one of the 20 biggest economies got Poland a lot, but not as much as Poles would have liked or expected.
And now, here to discuss the Central and Eastern European perspective on the ongoing war in Ukraine and how diplomacy in the Czech Republic is being affected by changes in its government is Jan Lipavsky, former Czech foreign minister. Minister, thank you so much for joining me on World News Tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start with the latest. We need to discuss what happened in Geneva. There is a quote from President Zelensky saying, "We can see that some groundwork has been laid, but positions remain different as the negotiations were difficult." He also added that the progress was made on the military track, but not political discussions because those were limited. As a former Czech chief of diplomacy, how do you read into the outcomes of yet another meeting over the past 2 days and the relatively vague statements that came after?
Honestly, we can follow almost for a year different kind of attempts to negotiate between Ukrainians, Americans and Russians, some kind of peace settlement or at least a ceasefire settlement. And we are all the time hearing different kind of words, but the substance remained the same. Russia wants Ukraine capitulation. They want to grab land which Ukraine is able to defend very effectively, therefore no conclusion as such. But of course, we always welcome the result of those negotiations. So I think it's no surprise that any major achievement was not achieved.
From your perspective, because this was yet again a trilateral meeting, so we had the representatives and delegations from the US, from Ukraine and from Russia. Do you think that the US is actually putting enough pressure on Russia to make it really want to sit by that table and decide on a ceasefire?
Obviously not. US possess economical sanctions which could be applied in a much harsher way on Russia, even though we have witnesses to be applied some of those. But Americans are saying, look, we want to have a dialogue with Russia, so we should not apply them all at once. I don't see it as a strategy which would be leading to concession on the Russian side, which is something which we really need to Russia leave Ukraine and stop the war.
Let's talk the Czech Republic and the outlook on the ongoing war. A major point of discussion in recent weeks and months, but especially with the focus over the past few days, is Ukraine's accession to the EU, January 1st, 2027. Are you in favor of Ukraine's fast accession to the EU?
I think it's very important that Ukraine will keep a fast Ukraine approach towards the EU membership. And look, now we are in a phase when we have an association agreement between Ukraine and the EU. We can see a huge increase in the terms of trading, for example, between Czechia and Ukraine, but I'm sure also with other countries like Poland. And this is also something which puts extraordinary pressure on Ukraine to change how the state operates, how the state works. For example, the existence of the institutions like NABU, the Special Procurator Against Corruption, it's part of the EU negotiation. So it's changing Ukraine for better. Rule of law, and of course for better trade partner, but also it is something for what people of Ukraine are fighting for. They are fighting for not to become the part of the Russian world, but to be world of civilized Europe. So we should be able to work with Ukraine. There should be no shortcuts. Ukraine should fulfill all the necessary criteria, but I don't mind if that happens fast. Let's have them as a member, of course.
Mm-hmm. I would also like to touch upon Hungary because the prospective Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar and his Tisza, that is leading in the polls ahead of the April parliamentary elections, said he was not in favor of fast accession of Ukraine to the European bloc. What do you think the motivations behind such stance could possibly be for people like Magyar?
So we can now observe a very intensive campaign in Hungary. Viktor Orbán is fighting for his political survival. He would like to repeat election success. Polls are saying that it is very unlikely, and basically Viktor Orbán has instrumentalized the Ukraine topic as one of the most important topics of the elections. So I don't mind even the conservative statements from Mr. Magyar. And again, I would like to say Ukraine has to fulfill all the obligation. It has to settle all the issues which has even, for example, with Ukraine, with Hungary. And this is also a very important message to countries like Moldova or the countries of Western Balkans, that there should be no shortcut. But if Ukraine is able to fulfill, and I observed in last years that the Ukrainians are really effectively trying to have all the legislation passed and the country change in a way that they can become a member of the EU. And this proposition should be on the table because Ukrainians are fighting for that. Russians trying to destroy Ukraine because of that. They don't want to have a Ukraine member of NATO, but also they are not happy with the EU membership. Remember, Maidan started with EU association agreement between EU and Ukraine in 2014. So yes, we need to keep this proposition in place.
You are one of the proponents of the Czech-led ammunition initiative. This very initiative, according to the words by President Petr Pavel only but 2 days ago, has delivered approximately 4.4 million large-caliber artillery shells to Ukraine since its launch, which was last year during the Munich Security Conference, if I remember correctly. But there is a conflict between the government right now and between the president. How do you assess the extent of damage that Ukraine would have to suffer on the battlefield if Prime Minister Babiš was to succeed and actually change the very nature of that initiative?
So by the numbers, by the figures which are being provided by the Ukraine side, it's almost half all the ammunition, in some months even more than half of all the heavy ammunitions being delivered through the Czech Munition Initiative. And it is really a power of the Czech industry. And our diplomacy and our companies able to procure this ammunition very often from the countries outside of the EU and then refurbish it and send towards Ukraine. So at this point, it seems that the government stopped its activities against the Czech Ammunition Initiative under the international pressure. They said, okay, we will keep it in place. But of course, what I criticize from the opposition is that they do not want to give any Czech national contribution, which I think is a set. So I hope that this process will keep in place, that the donors will continue to support Ukraine through this initiative.
And it seems to be the case, according to the latest polls in January, that 62% of people from the Czech Republic back the continuation of that very initiative, with 36 being against it. As I mentioned, Prime Minister Babiš, what is your opinion? Is the current Czech government a part of what was dubbed the awkward squad with Hungary and Slovakia now, or perhaps this is something else completely?
I would even say that it's reaching farther than just Slovakia and Hungary. Andrej Babiš is a member of Patriots for Europe, with some parties in like in Austria and France, which are not in power. Maybe not yet. So it's not only about Hungary and Slovakia. So I'm not happy for the position when Czechia is basically cutting all the help for Ukraine. It was our government. We try to do and give as much as possible, but ultimately we have lost the election. So the new government is limiting that. And yes, I'm afraid that if that continues, we might be perceived even like this.
Minister, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Jan Lipavsky, former Czech foreign minister, was my guest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment. Good night.